Live streaming is on.
Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fielka. Today is November 26, 2021. Want to thank Clinton Ignatoffs. Thank you so much, Clinton, for hosting us on his amazing podcast called Concern Netizen. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Alex MacKenzie. Alex, where are you calling in from?
Vancouver, British Columbia, Canada.
Thanks for your time, Alex. First question is, what's the best thing for a human being?
Wow, we're just hopping right to it, aren't we?
Yeah, we're just going to jump right in the deep end.
Well, first of all, I want to say it's good to see you again, Jerry. We did this interview a bunch of years ago, right where you're sitting now, I guess, live. So it's nice to be back, remote, but still tight. Okay, so first question again, best thing for a human being?
Well, wait, hold on, Alex, because I have to, nobody ever does small talk at the beginning. We jump into it, but I like that. So you're saying you actually were at my house in Venice, California, and I interviewed him?
Yep. I remember
and this
that.
was,
this is like
was
I
it
want to say like 6 years ago.
6? Okay, but was it post me having screen pixel at your venue, Blinding Light, or pre?
Oh yeah. It was well after. Yeah.
Well after. Well, anyways, I love to schmooze. That was nice. Yeah. So, dang, what's the best thing for a human being, Alex?
Best thing for a human being. I'm going to say, I mean, the first thing that jumps into my head is food, shelter, and sleep. But I'm going to go with shelter because I think if you got shelter, then you can probably find your way with food and sleep. But it's much harder to do either of those two without shelter. So, yes, shelter.
It's amazing. It reminds me of this some famous art sculptor. I can't think of his name. He said, if you're going to have underground cinema, it should be in a cave.
Yeah.
Like shelter. So just thinking of this idea of you being such a great curator and creating a space, that shelter sort of resonates with that idea.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So what's your favorite form of information, how it comes into you?
Mouth to mouth.
Yeah. We call that direct experience. That's good. Mouth to mouth. So why do you think humans collect or gather information?
I think legacy, self-identity. Those are
Great
probably
words. Legacy and self-identity. Boy, I don't get those very often. That's pretty good. Do you think this need or want to collect information is more innate or more invented?
I think it probably started as a way of survival, and then we complicated it.
Right, but start as a way of survival. Was it innate in our bodies and minds and soul, or did humans invent the need to collect?
Yeah, I think it was. Invented as a coping strategy.
Invented as a coping strategy?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. Do thoughts create emotions?
Oh, I think thoughts are a way to contend with emotions.
Contend. What's another word? Suss out, what does contend mean?
Like manage.
Manage.
Yeah.
It's a way to manage emotions. Yeah. Is thinking more innate or more invented?
I think it's invented. I think it's a coping mechanism.
Wow. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I
think about it.
That's
It's funny. It's funny because I made a film last year about a friend of mine, Rick Raxlin, who's an animator and an artist, and he does a lot of rubber stamp work. and one of his stamps says, "Think before you think," and that's what I ended up calling the film.
Nice. Now that's a short documentary or a feature?
Half an hour. It's kind of out of my. It's actually way out of my normal zone. I don't normally make documentaries, but it's almost like he's just an old friend, and I thought it'd be fun to sort of document his practice.
Well, I want to tell you where I got that from because it's interesting. McLuhan says, "I don't know what I think until I've said it." Joan Didion said, "I don't know what I think until I write it down."
Right.
But Walter Benjamin, he loves to quote George Duhamel. He says, "I can no longer think what to think. My thoughts have been replaced by moving images." What do you think of that?
I mean, I don't think he's serious. But I think it's a great quote. Sometimes I wonder, if people are saying things just because they know they'll be quoted. But I like Joan Didion's, and it makes a lot of sense, with her practice, her writing practice.
Yeah. Can humans think without language?
Yeah, I think humans can think without language. I think again, language is a way to assemble. I think language comes after thought, for sure. It's like a mechanism for organizing ideas and probably emotions as well.
What's more fundamental, language or music?
That's a good question. Language or music? I mean, in a way, they're the same thing. I'd say language is a form of music, and music is a form of language.
Yeah.
I'd probably argue they're identical. So they're equally important.
Appreciate it. And so Chomsky said a language is not just words. It's culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Alex, what do you do when language doesn't work?
Group hug.
That is a great answer. Group hug. That is really good. It reminds me of Craig Baldwin when I said, what's your favorite form of information? He said, human touch.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
And it's like, people don't think of human touch as information in general, but to say that. And then Ann Magnuson said, what's your favorite form of information? She says, a hug. Group hug is even better. In the 60s, we called that what do you call that when you have a sex with a group?
Polyamorous? Yeah, what is the word for that?
What is that word called? Yeah, I'll think of it sooner. Orgy. Group. What's the difference between a group hug and an orgy? Okay. Your observations of humans in general, are they more feeling or more thinking beings?
I think feeling beings that think about being, and that gets them feeling.
Yeah. Very good. Two questions from Alan Turing, 1950. Is thinking a function of the soul?
Did you say he asked that question?
He asked both these questions. Yeah, these were questions he asked. Yeah.
I'm not sure I believe in the soul, unless you're talking about style of music. I think the notion of a soul is a function of like feeling or wanting meaning. But I'm not sure that I buy into like the soul as existing, you know, all on its own.
Right. Yeah, that's probably one of my favorite genres of music. So that reference was great that we called soul. And then, you know, this other great
I do
word,
believe that soul exists.
this other great way to, when people say you sold out, SOLD,
Oh yeah.
I like to spell it, he sold out, SOUL apostrophe D, he sold out. The other Turing questions is, can machines think?
Oh yeah. Well, I knew he'd bring machines into it. Um, I I don't think machines can think in a human sense, but in a machine sense, yeah, I think thinking and machine learning aren't the same thing. But I think machine learning is like the machine's version of thinking.
You know, I just
But I
added,
still stick with saying, that has nothing to do with this notion of soul.
yeah. It's funny because I've been asking this question. I just added it about 3 or 4 months ago. And everyone, 99% of people say exactly what you just said. But, you know, some go, well, they sure are thinking because blah, blah, blah. So I'm sort of happy that people are saying, no, there's machine thinking and then there's human thinking. Yeah. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
Oh, I think I probably pursue meaning more, and it always gets in the way of happiness.
Wow. Why do you think that you pursue meaning more?
I think I'm just inclined that way. I mean, it keeps me up at night.
Well, we'll skip right to the next question. Well, you have ESP because you anticipate a question. It fits too good here. What do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh yeah, everything, and everything, and am I going to get enough sleep tonight?
That is good. Alex, you really get this. I'm having fun and I'm learning a lot of. Okay, does the brain more detect consciousness or create consciousness? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're detecting it, or are we creating it?
I think the brain enables it, maybe is a better word.
Enables. Yeah. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Thought, but not if you try and write it down.
Dude, there's no right or wrong answers to any of these questions, but that one you got right. Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer responded, said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
What new tool do I suggest? I guess a good new tool would be the ability to recognize and then like toss out the old tools and start again. If that can be called a tool.
Yeah, the ability to recognize what again? What are we?
Recognize the old tools and then toss them out and
Yeah.
start again. Because I think Audre Lorde is right, and I think exposing the tools is never enough.
Yeah.
I think we live in an era now where the tools are really well exposed, but we still carry on. It's shocking.
Which is, I mean, literally, do you think you have ESP?
No.
Dude, you exactly anticipated the next question. I mean, to the pinpoint. I'm serious. It goes like this. McLuhan learned from Ezra Pound that artists, filmmakers, musicians are antennas of the race. They're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions so that we can learn how to cope with what we don't like about the inventions. So it's sort of like you're summing up what you said, the ability to recognize the old tools and then toss them out in so it is saying we can learn these hidden psychic effects of our inventions to cope with what we don't like,
Right.
but we still ignore them. Why do humans still ignore the hidden psychic effects even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Did someone term it hidden psychic effects? Are those your words?
That's basically verbiage I got from studying McLuhan.
Okay.
Sometimes it's called unintended consequences.
Okay.
So hidden psychic effects are like, I'll give you a good example. We don't realize that cars enhance and intensify private mobility. We just think, oh, it gets us from point A to point B better, and it's got a heater and a radio, but it's putting us all in solo vehicles pretty much.
Right.
And so that's a hidden psychic effect. But some people realize it, but in generally, we don't realize like how Zoom has changed our lives. We just embrace it and go, wow, it works.
Are people happier in the HOV lane? Because there's more of them. What part of the HOV? People seem better off over there for some reason.
Yeah, but it's like you answered a question with a question. See, you win. That's what Irish people do. They go, I say, you Irish people answer question with questions. They go, we do, eh?
But I think like why to actually answer that question, why do we ignore those? I'd actually say, I mean, it sounds extreme, but I don't think it's extreme. I think we all have a bit of a death wish.
Yeah.
And I think we all have blind spots, and then there's a sway of empire and capital that's so deeply entrenched. So that's like, as I said, like we all see it going on around us every single day. It seems to me, especially these days. But I'd argue that someone 40 years ago would probably say, especially these days as well. It's there for the seeing, but I think we can't contend with it. And so I think we manufacture blind spots, but I think also because of the space that we inhabit, there's a kind of a death wish there. There's a self-hate going on. It's a product of the culture we inhabit.
Hollis Frampton said, narrative was born out of our animal necessity, from the spirit of our animal necessity, because we're waiting to die. So it's sort of like what you said, we have this death wish. So what do? We're waiting to die, so we invent narrative. We'll definitely get to that. Do you think artists have a moral obligation?
No, I think if anything, they have an immoral obligation.
Now you also anticipated this question. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
Do I have to be afraid?
Alex, you really get it, because a lot of people go, I'm not afraid of ideas, but you put it as a question. Do I have to be afraid? You know where I got that question? It's funny because it's twofold. It's John Cage said, I can't understand why people are frightened of new ideas. I'm frightened of the old ones. Then the guy who invented the what do you call it? A windshield wiper that goes and then it's what it it's
Intermittent.
intermittent.
Yeah, yeah.
Charles Kettering, he said, people are very open-minded about new things as long as they're exactly like the old ones.
He invented the intermittent windshield wiper.
I'm pretty sure Charles Kettering.
Oh, interesting.
It's like how
he's got a lot going on.
yeah, it's got also how who wrote a song from the windshield wipers was Captain Beefheart. He heard it and he wrote a song, because it wasn't in this 4/4 monotonous. It was like a little off kilter time.
Have you ever seen a film by actually a Vancouver filmmaker named Chris Gallagher? It's called Seeing in the Rain.
No, say the title once more.
Seeing in the Rain.
Oh, no, tell me about it.
It's basically a journey on a public transit bus in the rain. We're famous for our rain, especially now, given our atmospheric rivers we're getting up here these days. But it's basically a bus trip from the airport to downtown Vancouver, and he's sitting in the front with the driver, and he's pointing at the windshield wipers, and he cuts on the motion. So it's like tick, and then suddenly we're way ahead, and then tick, suddenly we're way back, and we're jittering toward downtown. But I can't remember if we get there. I think we do. I think finally it stops and somebody gets off. But it's pretty great.
How long is
time?
Say it again.
It's extending time and compressing time because of this intermittent thing.
Yeah.
It might be on YouTube.
How long about?
10 minutes max.
Yeah, good point. I can't think of the guy's name, but he said the ideal experimental film is 8 minutes. That's like the ideal. What would you say?
I was gonna say 8 minutes. I just thought I'm gonna say 10 because I don't know that it's 8. 10 sounds more sort of general.
But would you agree that it's like if you're gonna put a formula to experimental film, would you say 8?
Yeah, formula for an experimental film, I find problematic.
Yeah, but after showing experimental film, for how many decades have you been involved in experimental film?
Well, yeah, many. I guess since the late 80s. So
40.
Yeah, quarter century or so.
Yeah, four decades. You've gotten quite an experience in understanding the patterns of experimental film.
Well, I mean, it's one thing to say, what do I think is an ideal length?
Yeah.
As a curator or as someone showing work or testing people's patience. But then I think there's a lot of films that are all about testing patience,
That's it.
So 8 minutes ain't nearly long enough.
Did you see Christian Marclay's The Clock?
Yeah, I did.
How many hours did you watch?
I'd say in total probably 4 hours, coming and going. I returned at different times of the day. It's kind of an open house scenario. And I tried to hit certain times, like I tried to hit quitting time, because I thought that might be interesting, and it was. And then waking up time was interesting. I thought maybe the middle of the night would be, pretty film noirish or something. So yeah, I'm not seeing the whole thing. I probably never will. But anytime I watch any part of that film, I just think, my God, what a lot of work, more than anything.
Yeah, that's the thing.
I'm sure he had many, many helpers.
I'll tell you, overall, would you give it sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down, or just a
That's true. I'd say somewhere between and thumbs up, I guess.
Yeah.
It's an indulgence, but it's entertaining. It's entertaining. I wouldn't even call it experimental film. I'd call it.
Yeah.
I'd call it, crowd pleasing, big art.
Yeah. But film freaks think it's about being a film freak, but it's really about the way he edited the audio. It's
Oh, yeah.
not just clips.
Yeah.
If you want, the audio bleeds are amazing. But indeed, you read the New Yorker article about it, and he hired like 12 people to rent every VHS and every video house and catalog it. Then he spent like, I don't know, a year or two editing. It drove him nuts
Yeah.
editing.
I imagine people are just typing in search terms into these giant catalogs. And
Yeah.
Clock, clock, clock. Where are they? So how much of it did you watch?
Oh yeah, that's funny because yeah, I like the DCP cost the museum LACMA in LA $1 million for a DCP. How's that for but I watched probably about 2 hours, and it was like prime times, like 6 to 8 or 7 to 9. And people said the really cool stuff was like at 2 and 3 in the morning.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
But the best thing, and the friend who I got to drive us there, he go, well, when do you want to leave? You know, and we're looking at it, and we don't look at our clocks. We go, we'll just look at the screen. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever, or one of them?
I've had this conversation with people before. Maybe I had it with you. So I do have a go-to for that request. That I guess I question sometimes if I'm remembering it, or if someone told me a story about it when I was very young, and I invented the shape of it and the look of it. But I do have some vivid visual memories of this happening, and it's actually funny and absurd. I was in the bathtub, probably at the age of 3, with my older brother, who was 5 or 6, and I pooped in the tub, and I could see my brother observe, I could observe his much clearer understanding of what had just happened, what those little nuggets were floating around. I had no idea they'd come from me, and I thought, what are these things to play with? I had no idea. And he just quickly exited the tub while I just looked there and like, hey, what?
That is great.
And maybe I remember it because it had, a combination of humor and trauma.
Yeah. Is memory more a curse or more a blessing?
I think it's a necessary curse that maybe dresses up as a blessing, maybe.
Wow. Necessary curse dressed up as a blessing. Have you ever considered being a writer?
Yeah, I have, but I just think I'm too lazy.
Too lazy. No, you're really good with words. Did you grow up a reader?
Yes, enforced reader. My mom was an educator, and she just pushed books on me from a young age.
Really? Wow. So you think that's how you flipped into being a filmmaker, because the forcing?
I mean, when I say forced, I'd say enforced. I didn't feel like there was a pressure.
Oh, okay.
I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. But we moved around a lot when I was a kid, and so anytime you hit a new small town, it was sort of like, where do you fit into the school system? And people just couldn't quite tell, because basing it on your grades from the last town, who knows what their rating system is compared to yours. So I think my mom was just like, let's just make sure you've got the reading thing down, so that as you transition from town to town, you're going to, have that as an anchor. But yeah, I always liked it and continue to. And I've moved from fiction to nonfiction to extended New Yorker, articles. I now read the New Yorker cover to cover, which I never used to do. I used to just be really selective. But my partner Claire and I are spending a lot of our time off grid on an island near here, most of our time. And we thought it would be a really good idea to get a subscription to the New Yorker and a few other magazines. Another one we have is The Sun. I don't know if you're familiar with that magazine. It's a quality reading. Anyhow, yeah, I've started to read The whole thing, like, I mean, the whole thing, you know, the listings, Shouts and Murmurs, I'm never a fan of, but I still read it.
It's good.
Um,
No, that's
so,
very smart. Yeah.
so then, and then I'll jump away from that and just get tired. It's sort of like radio. I'll just listen to our local version of NPR, which is CBC, and then just get completely sick of it and kind of hate it, move away from it, do something else, and then come back to it. So it's kind of a cycle. You know?
Really well put. I've delved deep into New Yorker over the last 10, 20 years. And the thing about both the New Yorker and the Sun is you can dumpster dive them easily. Where I mean, I get them all, and they're expensive.
Well, I'll tell you a secret. Well, sort of a secret is you can actually get a 3-month subscription to the New Yorker for $12, and then you can resubscribe using a slightly different name and a slightly altered address. And that's what we've been doing. Every time you subscribe using that system, you get a New Yorker tote as part of your subscription. We have 9 totes.
Now you're buzzing. But do you read it online or hard copy?
Hard copy.
Ah, yeah. Yeah, I'm total magazine person, total radio too. So, Alex, tell me within your immediate family and then outside your immediate family, someone just briefly who had an impact on you, and what was that impact?
In my family, I'd say my granny, my grandmother on my father's side. I think I respected her, the way she led her life, made a garden, lived close to the land. But I also recognized she wasn't entirely happy with herself, and that gave me some insight to her. So yeah, I could relate. I guess I could relate to how she went about her way in the world.
Nice. Beautiful. I love calling her Granny too. That's what I call my Granny.
Oh yeah.
Granny is a great word. I love it.
Okay, I got to tell you this one thing. So years ago, when she was still alive, I had moved out to Vancouver from Montreal, and this is in the day of answering machines, right? You'd have a home phone and an answering machine, and so I'd come home from somewhere, and there'd be a message on my machine from my grandmother, and she wasn't that comfortable with answering machine messages, and so she spoke them like she was writing me a letter. So she would say, "Hi, it's just letting you know what the weather's like, and I put this and that into the garden," and then she'd pause and say, "Granny," and then hang up. as opposed to anyway, get back to me when you can. It's your grandmother calling. You just be like, "Yeah, it's a beautiful day outside. Missing you, Granny."
That is beautiful. Now, Alex, outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was that impact?
A good friend of mine who passed away, Owen O'Toole. I don't know if you're familiar with him or his work. He's a filmmaker, curator of sounds, did performance-based film. He passed away about 4 years ago. He had a pretty big impact on my development as a maker. I first met him when I was running my first cinema called the Edison Electric Gallery of Moving Images, and he came up to present his work on his own dime. I think he was living in San Francisco at that time. He eventually moved to LA. Yeah, he gave me a sense of the possibilities of performative cinema, which is mostly what I do, and how to step away from the limits we kind of place on our imagination. I think I'm still working on that one, but yeah, he had a pretty substantial impact, and he was a good friend.
Beautiful. And Owen's last name is spelled how?
O'Toole, O apostrophe. Speaking of Irish people, O apostrophe Toole.
L-E, yeah. And since you brought up performative cinema, I've been studying it deeply for like 5-10 years. And I'm curious if you had a say in the general picture, and I know invented isn't the right word, or like one guy goes, "I'm not into first." Who would you say was the pioneer inventors of performative cinema?
Oscar Fischinger, maybe. You know, he presented these live 35 millimeter multi-screen things with musicians. I mean, you know, it depends how philosophical you want to get. You could say, you know, shadow puppets on a wall, or the wall of a cave kind of thing, you know? I mean, I think we've all played with light, whether we knew it or not, and didn't imagine it as something you'd aspire to showing an audience. But, I mean, the minute a light goes on, you start playing with it.
But I understand what you're saying, because of course you go back. It's like punk rock. Well, there was these guys who played what could be called punk rock, and then Lester Bangs uses the word. So I'm saying in Oscar, they weren't calling Oscar performative cinema.
Right.
When the term came about, live cinema, expanded cinema, who would you say one or two were in your opinion, were the pioneer, you know?
You know, I'm going to leave that one blank because I hate to
Right.
champion certain people over others, because I think there's probably a lot of people who are doing it that didn't have a voice and were doing it and never kind of got the credit that they deserve. So I mean, there's a long list that people can look up.
Right. No, we should have a whole podcast on it sometime just to review, because I like to think of performance art being started by Jack Caprow and Jack Smith.
Okay.
And, you know, of course it started before that, but I mean performance art as we sort of know it in contemporary time. Alan Caprow definitely, but Jack Smith is sort of performative cinema in that he would invite all his friends over to watch a film, and he'd say the doors open at 9, and then he wouldn't start the film until like 2 in the morning. So they'd wait for hours, and then he would feed film into the projector that wasn't even edited yet. He would just do one-offs, you know. So in a way, I think that was, but I was going to say Louis Buñuel when he showed, I think it's either not L'Age d'Or, Land Without Bread, and he stood next to the projection like a travelogue,
right,
and gave a monologue while it was going on. You know?
Yeah. Well, are you familiar with these these tiny cinemas in the early days, turn of the century kind of cinema period, that were designed to look like streetcars, and they had a picture at the end of them, you know, that was filmed off the end of a streetcar in another city, and so you'd walk into these places and watch the film of another town as if you're almost like a fair ride or something, and you experience this other city on an actual pretend vehicle. So that's an interesting kind of proposal of like let's create an atmosphere, let's create a mechanism, and let's create an environment that you enter that isn't a cinema, that isn't a conventional way of sitting down and watching your typical movie, because that's not a narrative film. It's sort of a travelogue. Mostly it's just going down a street, checking things out.
That is amazing. I definitely want to learn more about that, but we'll move on. But I'll tell you one other thing Brian Konevsky taught me that's amazing is that these brothers had this cinema on the edge of the Grand Canyon where you know about this? For like 60 years, they showed a movie of the Grand Canyon and talked next to it. Can you think that it's the same film they're showing over and over, and they're saying the Grand Canyon? And I mean, that is a form of performative cinema because they're talking next to the cinema. And it is documented. I can send you a link to it, but it's like, how did we not know about this? You know, it's like, what? Like, I don't know. I can't believe I didn't know about these streetcar cinema. I mean, that is.
I mean, I know for certain they existed in Vancouver, but I know many other towns had them, and the materials would tour around, you know, because they're different cities for different cities.
Yeah. Were you raised a particular religion?
Protestant light might be the best way of putting it.
Do you pray?
Never. Not even as the plane drops and my head hits the water track.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
Sorry, I didn't make it more clear.
That is a God's apologizing to you. That is good. That is a more clear. How do you advise someone to deal with? Oh no, sorry. Here's the next one. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
I think evil is something we invented to lay blame and allay our fears and lack of control in the world.
Yeah.
But I do think there's a lot of self-hate management going on in a lot of people that we then call evil.
Yeah. You said that self-hate management?
Yeah.
Wow. Is that your term, or did you learn that somewhere?
Self-hate or self-hate management?
Self-hate management.
Nah, I guess I just made that up.
That is really. How do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And this one I'll set up with a few modern thinkers' thoughts. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurais. Keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK says, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's the basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to the Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
I don't know about that one. I think you do need to acknowledge your enemy, but maybe you need to think of them as something other than your enemy when you're doing that acknowledging. You know?
Yeah.
Yeah. And what
James? Go ahead.
Oh, how do I deal with?
Yeah, no. How would you advise someone to deal with an enemy? I mean, you sort of said it, but do you want to add in?
I guess, I mean, yeah, I'd say, really know them, like really understand them. And then you might find that in understanding them that they might not be your enemy anymore.
Yeah. Wow. James Joyce was the first projectionist and a manager of the first cinema in Dublin called Volta Cinema over 100 years ago.
Really?
Yeah. And he basically checked out. He said, this is stupid. Why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree?
How long did it take him to do that, to check out?
Yeah, I love when people listen closely. They don't let me just roll over the question and then they just answer the question. Because P. Adam Sidney, he challenged me. He says, he did not do that. And so I had to add the word allegedly checked out. Nobody can, they think I know what I'm talking about. But he did check out for whatever. Somewhere I got this reason because then years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
I guess in the case of the Faulkner thing, once you fictionalize it, you're doing a better job of it because it's uncomplicated by all the pitfalls of reality. So it just feels smoother. But that's not the truth. For example, taking a photograph of that tree, when someone sets up a camera and decides to point it in a certain way, they're working with the best light at magic hour and yada, yada, yada. So you're getting this ultimate version of that tree. Not everyone can be there at that time of day. So I guess that would be part of it. But I think, why not just live life? I think we have a symbolic relationship with the world instead of a direct one. and I don't think that's necessarily. Well, I don't think it's necessary. I think we've lost touch with the ability to truly be in the world. That said, I think escapism can be living in the world as well.
Yeah, that was good. But I like this. We have a symbolic relationship instead of what was
Direct.
the word you used?
Direct.
A direct. What? So that sort of resonates with McLuhan says all words are metaphoric. Is that what you're saying? We live in a metaphoric world. Is that same as symbolic or?
Yeah, well, I mean, it also ties into empire and capitalism. It's like if I create an object in the world that is a reproduction of something else, like cinema or like a painting, then suddenly I'm dealing with an object, which means I have to contend with, unfortunately, with its value in the world, and then it becomes a means of trade, and then we get into this whole mess of capitalism. If you can stay back from that and have direct, like I said at the beginning, mouth to mouth, then you're able to avoid getting into that mire, But we've built an incredibly complicated symbolic realm for ourselves that is next to impossible to get out of. So I can't see it going away.
Can't get out of it. Well, it's like, do you know what an NFT is? Have you heard about NFTs?
I was just thinking of that while I was saying it. Yeah,
because Colbert did this great thing. He called it "no fucking thing," as opposed to an AFT, which is an actual fucking thing. So it's like, as any experimental filmmakers sold their what do you call them, chips or files as NFTs, as it hit the experimental film world. Because I was going to say, Phil Solomon, I asked him all these questions and I loved him dearly because he goes, I'm a professional experimental filmmaker. He taught, that's how he made his living, but he got paid to go to some big highbrow museum or Sundance and show one or two, but he never got, what was due. But when he died, he got a third of a page obit in the New York Times. So I mean, that's all.
Is that what it's all about?
For experimental filmmakers, I mean, that's it. It's like poetry. You teach. You can't make a living being a poet or an experimental filmmaker. But there are people who know how to, in our 40 years similar crossover, who have switched to selling their files through art galleries. Hello.
Well, when I talk about let's say, this is all very much, mechanical reproduction, the whole conversation. But when I think about, so you make a film, you make a symbolic thing, you make a symbol, and then you make a reproduction of your symbol.
Right.
And then you're making multiple reproductions of that, and some are valued and some aren't, but they're identical. It's like, oh, what are we getting ourselves into here?
Right. It's
not that different than thinking about buying a condo, which is essentially a piece of air in the sky, that may or may not last. I don't know. It does. It's weird. It does have some analogies to real estate. The fantasy of ownership and what ownership somehow brings value to our lives. Nope.
It's like when Matthew Barney's Cream Master came out, I didn't really care about seeing it. I just heard it was lowbrow Fellini. And then this kid in New York got a dub of a dub of a dub of a dub on VHS, and he floated an NBC logo in the corner. And it was like, a great sort of way to show Cream Master, like many generations down. In some art gallery in New York was showing it. So I wanted to show that version. instead of Freemaster. And of course, they never responded because they like, dude, we don't want to get busted, you know. But he could sell like that, like Christian Marclay, he could sell, Matthew Barney could sell a VHS for, you know, $10,000. It's art. Whereas Steven Spielberg can't sell a VHS for $10,000. He sells a VHS for $29.95.
Yeah.
So it's like,
but he sells a million of them.
Right, right.
I guess it's a choice, right? It's like, do you want to sell a whole lot of little things, or do you want to sell one single thing for a big ticket?
Right. And that's what all the film festivals now, they go, we're only showing it online once. It's like, well, any kid can set up their camera and film it off their laptop.
Yeah.
And then they have a.
It's funny, I when I was running the 2 cinemas that I used to operate, I would regularly show one particular film, which will remain nameless, but it's fairly famous, but it's illegal to show it. And so I just showed a rough VHS copy of it. I'd advertise it locally, you know, it wasn't like I'd get in trouble. Yeah. So I'd show that version. And then a friend of mine knew the filmmaker because he'd worked with this person, and contacted me and said, he's more than happy for you to show the film, but I'm going to send you a better quality version of it. So
that's
you can
nice.
show a nice version of it. So I got a nice pristine VHS of this particular film instead of the rough, you know, 10th generation thing I was showing.
Now, if I guess, will you nod your head, or you don't want to be put in that spot?
It doesn't really matter at this point. I don't think it really matters.
Good.
Go ahead, guess.
Guy Madden.
No.
No. Craig Baldwin.
No. It's someone who's more in the public eye, and I think that was part of the problem.
Wow, but
it's quite old. But it's I mean, I'll just tell you, Karen Carpenter. The Karen Carpenter.
Karen Carpenter. Oh yeah. Oh, I know about that. Yeah. That's good. Very good. Yeah. Karen Carpenter's story. Yeah. Very good. Oh, I like that. So what first attracted you to pursuing filmmaking? I mean, your mom's doing this literature thing to you. Are you raised watching VHS, cable, movie theater experience? And at what point did you go, I want to do that? Like, what's your crossover from just seeing normal TV movies to experimental? Just walk us through it. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't a kid who picked up a Super 8 camera. I wasn't that kid. I went and saw conventional movies and didn't think twice about it. But then I took a college course called Short Story, Short Film, and it was comparing short literature to movies that were made, short films that were made based on that work. And I remember, very specifically, an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge.
Totally.
And seeing that in the class and just, blowing my, I mean, that whole scene where he's running and you're like, is this real? Is this not real? Is this in his head? And this kind of crazy, I think I didn't have the language at the time, I don't know if I have it now, to explain the way those scenes felt. It felt unreal and yet very real at the same time. And that was the beginning. That was a seed of like, oh, there's different ways you can use this medium that aren't, Hollywood. And then when I went to university, based on that experience, I took a couple of early, first year film studies courses, and then got excited about it and took an Canadian experimental cinema course with a guy named Peter Harcourt, who's kind of I guess a bit of a name in Canada in terms of film studies. And he's long passed away now, but that had a huge, really opened my eyes. And like most people, I ended up seeing things like Brackage and the things that were broadly available were the first things I saw. And yeah, a light just turned on and I thought, whoa, there's so many things that can happen here that are way outside of what I imagined could happen. And when you have that thought, it actually leads you to the thought, that same thought with everything. Like books don't need to be written like books. Poetry doesn't need to be written like poetry. You don't need to live your life like everyone else lives their life. So that, and I think university experience in general, when I talk to my friends, is very much about that. Was very much about that for me, just opening my. I mean, I didn't even know what a major was when I started university. What's your major? I'm like, what does that mean? It blows my mind now that I didn't know what the term meant, and I was in university. I was in a class, and they sent a paper around and said, write down your major, so that we get a sense of who's in this class. And I was like, write down my what? And the paper came to me, and most people had English, so I just wrote English because I thought everyone else is writing English. And then, the steep learning curve of, just being kind of blown away by the depth and rigor of learning at that level, and then having my eyes opened up to the possibility, not only of cinema, but of just ways of living.
Really well put, Alex. And it reminds me of when I very rarely, but do talk before students, like art or film students. As they're walking in, I'll say, what are you aspiring to be or do? And they'll go, editor, 3D animator, blah, blah, blah. And this one person went, a good person? I thought that was the best answer. And then another one said, a role model, because I come from a small town. In the kids in my small town could learn, I could be an animator too,
Right.
And it's like just the way you change that. Think like, you mean, no, what's your major? Well, what about my minor? And then back to Occurrence. That movie is so important because people saw it on Twilight Zone TV series, and they also saw it in the classroom situation.
Yeah.
There were two other films I was wondering if you encountered, which we didn't realize we were getting experimental film. Well, there's a third one too. One is Jim Henson's first film. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think so.
Oh, in the one image is his head is in the toilet and they flush it and you see his head. But it's experimental animation and
Okay.
it's a cool film and we didn't realize. And then Mel Brooks is The Critic.
Oh yeah.
That we saw that before a movie and a big theater. So we were seeing, it was making fun of. But I'm saying, like, the first experimental film that you remember really getting you, besides Occurrence, sort of more in the canon of experimental film.
Yeah.
That had
probably it was probably I wouldn't say it was like my favorite at the time, but it was probably the one that I remember seeing first was David Rimmer's Surfacing on the Thames. I don't know if you know that. You know David Rimmer's work?
How do you spell his last name?
Rimmer. He's most well known for a film called Variations on a Cellophane Wrapper.
Wow, I don't know.
He's a BC-based filmmaker in the world of experimental cinema in Canada. He's kind of one of the honchos, I guess. And it's a manipulation of very few frames of film, extremely slowed down.
It's a structural film. Yeah. No, I'll definitely check them out. That's the amazing thing. Anybody like me or you or us folks who have been in this for years, it's amazing how there's films we don't know about. But it is it's not like you can know the big Hollywood commercial film world, and it's more likely you're going to find stuff, or even foreign films or art films.
Yeah.
But in the experimental film, it's like so specialized. It seems like, how did I not know that?
Yeah, no, it's true. And there's still more than you can eat up in a lifetime, even though
it is totally. But I wanted to go back because one of these, you've got a great website and you have essays that you've written and essays people wrote about you. And this woman wrote an essay, Elizabeth Gross, or no, she quotes Elizabeth Gross. And I wanted to go back to when I brought up Joyce saying, why see a movie of a tree when you can go outside to see a real tree? And this woman wrote an article about you, and she quotes Elizabeth Gross, who says, the painter sees the tree, but in some sense, the tree sees the painter. That's like that really blew my mind, because the cover of my book has a still from Jay Rosenblatt, and the guy is like looking at a tree. It's like an old education film, and the dots are going from his eyes.
Yeah.
I didn't even realize. We just picked that to put on the cover, and then
No.
my friend goes, "Dude, do you know your question relates to that?" And I goes, "You're kidding? That's amazing."
It's funny too, because a tree is probably the most common picture that we use when we're trying to explain to people how a camera works or how camera obscure works.
Yeah.
Whenever we see that illustration, it's like tree, beep, beep, upside down tree. So it's like the tree is going into the camera, but the camera is like, I just love that interaction.
Yeah. So, Alex, you made a lot of films, and I like that you've changed your career, you change your direction to more performative cinema or whatever. A screenwriting teacher told me a great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great film is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process?
Not to sound smarty pants, but I think I try not to let intention get in the way, but it is a constant battle.
But it is what?
It's a constant battle.
It's a constant battle, yeah.
I try not to let intention get in the way, but it's a constant battle of, feeling like I want that thing in there, and then I don't want it. So, I honestly think that's what creative process probably is, in a nutshell, is that constant pushing away the attraction toward intention.
Well, it might be summarized by this line I've used in talking to poets. Leo Bersani did a study of Mallarmé, the symbolist poet. He said, the very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition. Is that what you're talking about?
Say it again.
The very crises which threatens the writing of poetry sustains poetic composition.
Yeah, I think that's very similar.
Yeah.
I think that's a beautiful way of putting it.
It's
and
really
I think you could replace poetry with any number of creative pursuits.
Yeah, it is. And then Gary Snyder, the nature beat poet, said, the task of a poet entails seeing the world without language, then putting that seeing into language. And to me, that's what experimental filmmakers are doing. Yeah. It's like, just take your camera, go into your garden, put it out of focus, and then shoot all your flowers, and no one will know you're just wandering through your garden. Until you keep that one shot that's in focus, that's just their garden. Which is a big thing with me in experimental film. How much percentage of experimental film is nature filmmaking?
I was just going to say, I thought you were going to say how much of experimental film is made in people's gardens, because I can attest to saying quite a number of my films have gardens. But I do think there's something about nature that has an affinity to experimental film. Most definitely.
Yeah.
And whenever I see an experimental film that's rigorously about not nature, I do feel like something's missing.
It's pretty amazing. And I was watching this just to get a pop view of experimental film on YouTube. I watched, the history of experimental film in 15 minutes. And, it's pretty well narrated, but he goes, the greatest experimental film ever was Koyaanisqatsi. It's like, oh my God. And then he says, it was never done before. And do you know the whole story of how he went to Canyon and he rented Hillary Harris's films? And I mean, Koyaanisqatsi is just an extension of what Hillary Harris already did. But it's just fun that when we saw Koyaanisqatsi in the big theater, we said, we've seen this in Ann Arbor for years, but this guy got it at a popcorn theater. How cool. And he got George Lucas to put his name on it. Like, this is like, what?
I mean, again, that has so much to do with, intention, but also just marketing, unfortunately. It's like, how are you choosing to present your vision or whatever you want to call it in the world? And it's like, well, I choose, he chooses mega popcorn.
Yeah.
But having said that, it still does amaze me that film showed in large cinemas for so long.
Yeah. And you got to hand it to Reggio. He, at some point, he went and fasted and didn't talk for 10 years. It's like, he's a very spiritual guy, but he also did an amazing thing. How do you make your living if you're an experimental filmmaker? You teach. I mean, basically, that's the main formula. He sold his outtakes to stock footage houses, and it ended up on American Express commercials.
Right. And early NFTs.
Yeah, totally. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your audience when you're making your film?
Not much. I need to feel okay about it mostly.
Yeah.
I don't think I want to think about audience too much. But I think I would say I'm not too different than everybody else. And so if I'm comfortable with whatever it is I'm making, then maybe I imagine that everyone else probably is too. When I say comfortable, I just mean that it's effective. It's doing what I want it to do.
Beautiful. McLuhan said everything we invent extends some humanness. They said human sensorium. So clothing extends our skin. Knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter and the projector extends our eyelid. Open, shut. What does film extend for you? What humanness?
I guess you could say that it extends attention.
TENSION?
Attention.
Oh, attention. Yeah, it extends attention.
Like
yeah.
It's an enforced paying attention. It's almost like pre-made meditation. If it's doing its job.
Pre-made, MADE.
Yeah, like like some preformed way of getting you to focus on something outside of yourself, give yourself to something else, and allow it, space in conversation with yourself.
Yeah, one experimental filmmaker told me it's like a Faustian agreement you make to surrender yourself to the cinema. Like, that's why Kenneth Anger says the day cinema was born was a black day for mankind. Yeah, McLuhan said that film extends your foot.
Mm.
Isn't that heavy? Yeah, you travel, magic carpet ride. Well, this is a question I never asked, but I've been thinking about it a lot because of female gaze has become big dominant in film study. Then there's the male gaze. Then I like the Zoom gaze. The Zoom gaze is I can tell if you're checking your email while we're doing this. It's like the Zoom gaze. You can even see in their glasses. But it's a real basic question. I know it's stupid. I'm trying to refine it, but is human gaze more innate or more invented?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I'm inclined to say invented.
Yeah. You're right, dude. There's no right or wrong answers, but you got that right. My friend, he insists. We're talking about this because of course it's both and it depends, but you know this woman Alice Bloch, she invented cinema. What's her name? Alice something. There's a documentary about her. She's like,
I know you're talking about. I can't remember
yeah,
the last name.
amazing that none of us really knew. She's like she's inventing the shit like with Méliès, and nobody cared, and she didn't get known. So we know Méliès or whoever.
The very fact that we can't remember her name is a big indication.
It's even worse. But you know, there's a whole doc on her, and it's good. I think it's Bloch, BLANC. Okay, so here's my theory. I just would love to get your feeling on how you feel about it. If she's making films 120 years ago, or inventing narrative storyboarding, you know, like Méliès sort of, is she already have the male gaze because she's learned how to frame from male painters and male photographers? So the dominant framing, or the real hidden question is how did you form your framing aesthetic? You know, that's your, you know, I asked Bruce Bailey and he said, Cocteau said the way they put the knife and fork on a dinner table. That's but then Robert Frank came along and shot a photograph like this. But you know, is there a difference between the female gaze and the male gaze, or the child gaze and the adult gaze? And how do we develop that? So I don't know. Just a lot of thoughts. Any thoughts from you? I appreciate.
Well, I mean, I think it would be appropriate to bring in trans gaze and where male and female can somehow be interlinked, either one on top or one on the bottom, or some meshing of that. And this is all. Sorry. I think we just make this up as we go along, and we react to the standards that are in place. And if you're an experimental filmmaker with yourself, then hopefully you're questioning it all the time, and demanding change or making change, so that we are constantly finding new ways to see.
Yeah.
And being open to new ways to see.
Yeah.
But I think that's a knife and fork thing. That's quite amazing.
That was, and Bruce Bailey, he was such a trip. I mean, did you ever meet him and talk to him?
You know, he came up and did a show at one of my cinemas, and he was staying at a friend's place. And yeah, one thing that I remember, because I was running a cinema at the time, and I was just kind of harried and running around, and he gave me a word of advice, and that word of advice was, remember to eat.
Beautiful. Peter Greenaway said cinema is much too rich a medium to be left to storytellers. Are experimental filmmakers telling stories a different way or doing something completely different? In other words, we watched Tony Conrad's The Flicker. Me and you could have a story go through our head, but it wasn't really made to tell a story per se, what we think is narrative.
I think there's always these arguments about, well, film is a linear medium, so there's a beginning, a middle, and end. Therefore, beginnings, middles, and ends are parts of the way a story is. But I don't really buy that argument. I actually think storytelling took precedence early on in the shaping of cinema as an art form, and for reasons of capital. And it's been a battle for you and I and people like us ever since to wrench it away from that standard, and how we interact, how we interact with emotional film as opposed to motion picture.
Say me and you and George Manupelli are starting the Ann Arbor Film Festival 60 years ago. Time travel. Should it be more inclusive or exclusive? And I'll just set it up briefly. Chick Strand told me she started Canyon Cinema with Bruce Bailey to recreate her 11-cent movie-going experience.
Oh, yeah.
See a newsreel, a cartoon, and then add an experimental film. Brackage came along and said, nope, don't do that. Don't show the other stuff, just show experimental. Should we be inclusive or exclusive?
When I started showing films, my strategy, because I think people aren't used to watching these kinds of things, and you do need to wean them off of one thing and bring them into the other. Otherwise, they're just going to reject it because it's foreign enough that it's reads as nonsense potentially, and they get frustrated with it. So what I used to do was I would show educational films first, and I would follow it with an experimental film that was informed by the educational film. So I'd do a series called, Fashion Victims, and I'd show some films that had, items of fashion in them that were educational films, or how to dress nicely for your boyfriend or girlfriend. And then I'd show some experimental films that were informed by that, or used some found footage, or like Reefer Madness, followed by films that are actually by artists about drugs, that kind of stuff. So that for me was a way to make it work for an audience, but in a more kind of broader sense of we should be more inclusive or exclusive. I'd say it really depends on what or with whom, and maybe we want to be more exclusively inclusive.
Inclusively, I messed the word up.
Exclusively inclusive.
Exclusively inclusive. That is good. Yeah, because I mean, in the big picture, you show Betty Boop Hitchcock and then Bruce Conner, and you're giving people a big picture of the possibilities, like the way music should be. But we have a rock station and a jazz station, so they're not learning to integrate all of them. So,
yeah, but if someone, say, my cousin sees Koyaanisqatsi, when they ask me what do I do for a living, it's a question I hate. Then that might be a reference point that I can use that they find relatable, that they can connect to, because they don't have any sense. It's like, well, you've seen Koyaanisqatsi, kind of like that, but more intimate and smaller, and maybe a little harder to watch sometimes. As a shortcut to explaining what it is you do. I often use a comparison like, well, there's Picasso, and there's Robert Bateman, who's a famous Canadian, nature painter who just draws like ducks and things, like very literal paintings. He's very good at it. There's Picasso and there's Robert Bateman. So I'm more in the Picasso side of things, where when you look at it, it doesn't quite make sense. But then there's also Jackson Pollock. So let's go a little further over, and I'd say more there. Or there's literature and there's poetry. I'm more the poetry side.
Yeah.
I'm not writing books.
That's again, you got ESP because you exactly touched on the next question. But I have to interject this really quick. When experimental filmmakers are writing their blurbs for my screenings over the last 30 years, I'd say just put in there it's like John Waters and David Lynch, and you'll get an audience. Right. If you try to explain it, and Walter Benjamin, or they'll go, "What the fuck is this?" So I hate to do that, but you did it well. In fact, what are the services and disservices of marginalizing experimental film? Jackson Pollock was on the cover of Life magazine in '49. Regular folks could start forming an aesthetic on experimental painting. Maya Deren and Bruce Conner were not on the cover of Life magazine. Generally, it's privileged, entitled, I call them rich art kids, who develop an avant-garde aesthetic and dominate experimental film world. Any comment?
Yeah, I mean, it makes me think of that. My kid could do that. You know, that kind of looking at a painting that's like 3 lines. It's like, yeah, you're exposed to it, but you clearly don't get it. That said, I think ghettoizing anything is a disservice. And talking about those prisons is a disservice.
Yeah.
You talk about the privileged, white kids who are getting on the covers of things. Well, that's going to happen no matter what. There's always going to be those who are entitled and work it. But that's almost beside the point. I think there's a fear in our community that if experimental film gets trendy, then it'll lose something in the process. But the whole definition for me is constant reinvention. So the only thing that would be popular would be old models or historical markers.
Really great words here. Thank you. You're giving me all the words for my presentation at the 60th Ann Arbor Film Festival.
Are you doing a presentation? That's awesome.
But the last person I asked that, I would say the services and disservices of ghettoizing or marginalizing experimental film. She goes, don't use the word ghettoize. And so I used marginalize, and then you brought in ghettoize. Right. So I was like, yay. So the other thing is a guy went backstage at a Sun Ra concert, and he went up to Sun Ra and says, my kid could do this. And Sun Ra went, but can he transcribe it? What's more important, conviction or compromise?
I guess they each have their time and place. I don't know that one's more important than the other.
I skipped one too. Thank you for answering that. I talked to Michael Apted 40 years ago, the filmmaker, 28 and Up, Coal Miner's Daughter, and he made a documentary on a Russian rock star. And I said, why do music video makers feel so obliged to edit fast? Most people don't know that rapid montage was basically invented by Abel Gance in 1922, but it really flourished in when MTV hit 40 years ago. Marty Scorsese says, I cut my films faster because of MTV. Michael said, because we've learned to take in information faster. I asked this with a bias. Can humans literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
I don't think we can. When I think about that idea of cutting faster, I'd almost argue the MTV generation also came with a change in the way that we make things, the means of production. And so there was an ability to cut things more rapidly that was possible, but much more difficult prior to that. When you start editing video, it's much simpler to cut very short snippets as compared to the labor involved in cutting 35 or 60 millimeter tiny bits and then making a negative, turning a negative into a positive in that way. So I'd say in the same way, really, that experimental filmmakers will often use contemporary technology and then just throw a wrench in it and mess with it. A lot of people, it's almost a cliche of like, oh, MTV stole their ideas from the experimental world. There's an argument to be made around that, and the trickle down effect of people making things that don't have any economy attached to them, and then someone finding out a way to attach economy to it. And that seems almost inevitable.
Yeah, exactly, man.
It's like gentrification, or art gentrification.
No, I have a whole lecture now, every little aspect that went from experimental film and then the example in mainstream cinema. I mean, the best is Frank film. He did not invent that. It really Stan Vanderbeek cutting up magazines, but Stan got it from John Field or whoever, so that collage technique, but he filmed it and he did it good. And the year after Frank film came out, which won in 73 in Ann Arbor, and then it won an Oscar or got nominated. That's pretty cool when something goes from Ann Arbor to the Oscars, just, you know, in the big picture. They said Rhoda, the TV show, called up and says, dude, we wanted you to do our opening credits for our TV show, like Frank film. And Frank went, nope. And then you see him and it looks exactly like Frank film. Well, is he going to say, dude, you ripped me off? Well, I ripped off Sam Vanderbeek. So, you know, what's the difference? Who owns? T.S. Eliot said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
What language? My inner dialogue. I guess, I mean, the obvious answer or the sensible answer might be emotional. It's an emotional language.
Whoa, emotional. That's sensible answer. That's good. That's a sensible answer. What's the non-sensible answer?
Well, I mean, the boring one might be English or French.
Right. That's that. You know what I do? Okay, here's what I do. When they say English, then I follow it up and I say, well, what form is your inner consciousness in? And then they go, oh, TV commercials, or, you know, my mother complaining at me or whatever. But one of my favorite answers was, you know, Abigail Child, the filmmaker in New York.
Yeah.
She said, what language is your inner dialogue in? She goes, I wish I knew. George Manupelli.
Well, I mean, in a way, you know, saying that it's emotional is a similar answer in a way, because I think emotions are things that are like the hardest thing to control, and so not being able to get your hands on it and to shape it is really what it's all about, you know?
Exactly. No, it's an amazing answer. I don't know if I've ever had emotional as an answer, but it's something to really think about. And especially your follow-up saying you don't have control. I mean, do humans have, that's a good question I should add. Do humans have control over their emotions? What do you think?
Oh, you're asking me now?
Hey, you invented it. You're the first guinea pig.
I'd say a quick no, they don't.
That's my I also did this workshop on psychosomatic cinema, because someone showed, Bruce McClure showed in Ann Arbor, and a woman ran out of the theater because it made her start her period. But, you know, then I just asked people's examples, because, you know, when you saw when people saw The Exorcist, they would, you know, get sick or freak out. But Scott Stark said it best. He said, porno, it gives guys boners. and then what else is psychosomatic cinema? Old Hollywood movies make you cry.
Right.
Well, that's psychosomatic, right? It's making you cry.
Yeah.
So I mean, all cinema is psychosomatic, but it was interesting because people were passing out at the 20 that film where the guy cuts his arm off on his hiking trip, 24 hours, and they were passing out, and it was like, you know, was it that he was a great actor, or because he's actually sawing away at his arm? I mean, it's
I have a kind of a I'll do the very short version because it's a kind of interesting, involved story. But the short version is, I was presenting a show at the Edison Electric, my first cinema, called Medical Atrocities. And it was short, weird old medical films mixed in with experimental films, as I said. A woman was in the audience. I was showing an eye surgery film, close-up of an eyeball, real surgery, not Louis Buñuel. And she passed out and wet her pants, peed her pants. And a friend of mine was in the audience who was a doctor. And he had come to the show because I'd actually acquired one of the films from him, a video about digital rectal exams, which was meant for doctors to see, not regular people. And he went and checked on her, and she was fine, but she had passed out. But by then, someone had called an ambulance. So all these ambulances showed up at this cinema that's actually not a legal space, and burst in to check on this girl who's passed out. And they're just like, what is this? I'm like, oh, we're showing a series called Medical Atrocities. And they're just like, hey, is it showing tomorrow night? I want to come check this out. And then it gets better. So, you know, she was carried away and she was fine, but you know, a little embarrassed. And I think, so years passed, she comes into my second cinema, the Blinding Light, and says, I don't know if you remember me, but I was the woman who came to your show when you ran the Edison, and I passed out. And I was like, yeah, I totally remember you. That was like kind of a highlight of the whole time. And she said, yeah, I ended up being inspired by that whole thing to go to art school. And I went to the local art school, and now I'm doing my thesis piece on that experience.
Oh my God.
So like, one day I'm going to show that piece, you know?
Did you end up showing it?
No, I mean, that was the last I heard.
Yeah.
But that was enough for me.
That was really good, because it's that whole epileptic fit warning you have to put, like, to supposedly, I think Tony, did you see the Tony Conrad documentary? I think it says there somewhere that he didn't put the warning. He was told, you've got to put the warning. And I showed Buzzbox once, that Flickr play animation. And I didn't realize I should have made the announcement, and a kid passed out in the front row. You gotta, I say, if you're gonna have an epileptic fit, get out of this room right now. There is strobic event right now, you know.
I don't know, like whenever I was showing that kind of work, I always just said, if you start to see something flickering, just close your eyes and then you can stick around.
That right. Either close your eyes or I just try to make it clear to them. So because they could have a pass out and bump their head. That's the bad part, you know. So George Manupelli's mantra, one of them was ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says there is no self-expression. Cecil Taylor, the great jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me. Is art making more? I know it's both and it depends, but is it more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever technology or culture is dominant?
I'd like to think it's self-expression, and that we just use the tools that are handy, based on, you know, the world we live in, I guess. I mean, I've certainly had, you know, presented workshops to people who didn't have a clue about, I don't know, hand processing film or how to even operate a projector, and those things will trigger something in that person to pursue that in some way. That probably wouldn't have happened had they not taken that workshop. But something brought them to the workshop in the first place. So I think we're drawn to mediums that are available to us that make the most sense to us. I've often bemoaned the fact that I couldn't have just been a writer and then wouldn't require all these tools and gear and crap that I have to haul around when performing, or rather just have a pencil and a paper, you know? Who knows, maybe that's the next step. Lighten my luggage.
Can art making be egoless?
In a vacuum.
Wow. That's very Cajun, Alex. I asked for 90 minutes. We're at that point. Can you give me another 10 or 15?
I can give you another 10, but I have to be somewhere at 1. So.
10. Fine. I appreciate it. In fact, I usually get through 50 questions. I only got through 30. So We should do part 2 if you're willing someday, but let's cut to this. Moshe Feldenkrais says, you can literally identify a weakness and turn it into a strength, rather than we're usually taught to overcome a weakness.
Right.
Tell me a weakness that you've morphed into a strength.
I feel like I frustrate myself with how long it takes me to get work made, I guess. I mean, some people I know would argue, oh no, you're pretty quick compared to me, but in my own personal realm, I frustrate myself with the procrastination that I get up to. But I've also learned over the years that taking a long time to get it done actually means that I end up thinking about it more. So the thinking part of it is actually usually the more interesting aspect of it all anyway. And there's a million projects that I've never even pursued because I feel like I think through them and then put them to bed. I don't even render them into the real world. So I guess I could, I mean, in a way, it's like a job interview question. I'm really too responsible. Like, no, but yeah, I guess taking a long time to get stuff done has helped me, enjoy that process.
No, I get it totally, and it was a good answer, because I refused to make a feature film for 60 years because I was like, I have one in my head. Why should I get it out and ruin it?
Yeah.
And then,
no, that's a really good point. The ruining, right? That's a big part of it.
Yeah, that's it. And I tell me one major element of your creative output process that's changed, and one major element that stayed the same in your 4 decades.
Well, I've definitely moved toward performance and performance-based filmmaking. That changed from the beginning when I was doing just single channel work, and that made a huge difference to my life and my process. And then I guess the same would probably be a continued interest in the tensions between nature and culture. I think that's been pretty consistent in what I do. Boring answer.
No, between nature and culture?
Yeah.
What would you say is another word for nature and another word for culture, just general?
The real world and the manufactured world.
Right, the real versus manufactured. Yeah. Alex, this has been highly enlightening. I really appreciate it. I got just a couple more and we'll wrap it up. Joseph Boyce said, make the secrets productive. Lou Welsh said, guard the secrets, but constantly reveal them. But it was Thornton Wilder, 1928, said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for 90 minutes. I'm really grateful. I'm not insinuating you haven't answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Keeping your overhead low and your aspirations high, and
that is good.
And trying to get through it, survive it, and feel okay at the end of the day.
That was so good. Okay, well, we can't, because you answered that so well, we can't avoid. These are the 5 Alan Watts questions, just in like 1 or 2 words, really brief, quickie. This is better than a job interview.
Okay.
Who started it all?
Who started it all? That's not a quick, it can't be quick answers.
That's a good answer. Leave it at that. Are we going to make it?
I have my doubts.
Where do we put it?
Behind us.
Who's cleaning it up?
Whoever's in front of us.
Is it serious?
Deadly serious.
Whoa, that was beautiful. Okay, last question. Thank you, Alex. What gives you the most optimism?
What gives me the most optimism? I guess an observation in culture today where I see people moving away from empire and capitalism. That makes me feel good.
Yeah.
I'm not sold that's actually going to happen, but it's something to look to.
Yeah. Okay, bonus, because you're so good. If you're walking down the street and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, you're walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Don't be so hard on yourself.
Alex, I hope we can do this again someday. This was truly enlightening. Like just before Ann Arbor, it would be fun to talk and just stay on experimental film, but it's really been beautiful. I really thank you a lot. And if we ever dig out the other tape, it would be fun to compare.
Yeah, no, yeah. I'm sure that there are some common answers there. In fact, when I heard the question, I'd be like, I think I know the answer to this question from before, you know? But I'd be curious about the more, like, did I tell the story about pooping in the tub last time?
Pooping in the tub sounds like the name of your memoirs.
There you go.
Well, that was a question I was supposed to ask you. If a publisher was asked you to write the story of your life, what would the title be off the top of your head?
It would have to have something to do with light, probably. How about lightweight?
Not light. What's the second word?
Lightweight.
Oh, lightweight. WEIGHT.
I'm not sure. Maybe it's WAIT.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Alex. What a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thanks so much, Jerry.
That was fun. See ya.
Okay.